Hi everyone, welcome back. Recently I received a lot of requests from everyone to do MCP server video with Python. So that is what we're gonna do in this video. At the end of this video, you will know how you can create your MCP server with Python and how you can deploy that MCP server on AWS environment. In this video, we're gonna deploy an EC2 instance, and this is what the final result we are aiming for. If you can see, I have a client running and it is pointing to a public IP address, which is my EC2 instance. And that is what you're gonna have at the end of this video as well. And I'm using strengths, it can be any client. And once you run your client, it should be able to call your EC2 instance and get all the tool details. So in my case, it called the tool, which is the server details. That's what I was asking, and that's what we're gonna set up in this video. So without wasting our time, let's create our MCP server. For MCP server setup, I'm gonna be following a FastMCP documentation. You can go search for FastMCP. It's pretty simple. You just initialize your server and create tools just by annotating tool on top of it. So yeah, let's go into our code and let me clear. I think it's old lab terminal. So now I have an empty folder here, demo. I'm gonna be creating a server, so let's create another um, directory. Let's call it server and server. Now before we start, let's create our virtual environment and for all our dependencies. Now our environment is created. I'm just gonna create a requirement file. Now this file is basically used to define any dependencies. In our case, we have one, which is MCP, FastMCP. Now once we have defined our dependency and version, we can install I think so. I just created inside environment, that's why. All right, so now it is in the right folder. Let's install it. All right, so we can see that our dependency installed. Now I'm just gonna create a MCP server now. For that, let's import our FastMCP. Okay, so I'm pretty lazy, so I already have this code, so I'm just gonna copy this, but I'm gonna go over with you. So to define, we already know how we can initialize it. It's just gonna be simple initialization. So once we have initialized, we have our server set up. Now we need to give an entry point to our Python file. So in this case, I have this entry point which I have defined here. Now you can see here, okay, we just import this. So let me go over this with you. So we have this main entry point, and we are saying if the host is defined in the environment, use that, otherwise use localhost. Similarly, if the port is defined, use that, otherwise use 8000. And at the end, we are just running our server, which is MCP server. One thing you notice, we don't have a tool defined yet. So I have written simple tools, which could be, let's say, which I showed you in a demo. It's like simple get server info, which provides you the instance information to the client. And for this we can just use even another one. We can check in a demo, so it could be just hello world with just when it is called, it just returns some static hello world from MCP server. The idea behind is when we call this MCP server, we should see that which tool is invoked. If I'm getting a server information, it should invoke this one. And if I'm calling, okay, call me a tool for hello world, I should get this response. So yeah, once it is defined, let's just save this information and see how we can run this. So I'm just gonna run python main.py. So we can see our server is running now. If I had a client, it could consume this MCP server. Now before we go and deploy this, I want to go over deployment criteria and different options. Now one option is we can take this file, put into our EC2 instance, and run all the installation which we did, which is install the Python into our EC2 instance, install all the dependencies, and write a script which can trigger this and run MCP server for us. And the second option we can containerize this solution into a Docker image, which I'm going to be covering now. Again, this is not necessary for our EC2 deployment, but it is more recommended because all our dependencies are inside one image, and it is much easier. You can deploy that image anywhere. You are not bound to EC2 instance. Plus, it not gonna install Python or other dependencies again in EC2 instance. To create a Docker image for this, I'm just gonna create a Docker file. Now this Docker file, again, I'm just gonna have a Docker file here with me, and I'm just gonna paste it here. So what is covered in this Docker file? It's very straightforward, so let's go over one by one. So first we have defined our image, what kind of a Docker image we want. This is we are using, which is a working directory given, and then we are installing all the dependencies. Now this is something you are updating your solution and removing unnecessary files. So and then you have requirement, the step which we did basically. So we are copying our requirement file, and then we are installing pim install, which we did before setting our server. And then we copy our main file because that's the one which we have here, and expose 8000. We are saying that our image, Docker image, we need to expose our port 8000. That is what we are trying to run our MCP server. Host, basically we have defined again, it's going to be run on localhost, and it's going to be running on port 8000. And the last is basically the command which we ran, if you remember, it was simply python main.py. So that's what we are saying. At the end, once this setup is done, just run this command for me. So after that, this Docker file would run, and then you're gonna have your MCP server running on your port 8000. What we can do, we can simply just run it Docker image here and test it out before we deploy into our EC2 instance. Now to run Docker, we gonna go we're gonna build our Docker image. Again, now just to remind you, building this Docker image in your local is not necessary, and you can totally skip this part if you don't have a Docker installed in your local. You don't need to do that. And I'm just trying to show you how basically on EC2 instance, when you run your Docker image, how it will be, uh, and how when this Docker file will run, how the Docker image will look like. And one second, why I don't have Docker? Oh, sorry, my bad. Okay, uh, but the script which I'm gonna give you for EC2 instance setup, it automatically install your Docker, so you don't have to do that. If you have Docker image, is good. I mean, if you have Docker installed in your environment, definitely run this and test it out. But if you don't have, you don't need to do that. When I cover the EC2 instance part next, I'm gonna have the script which we gonna install Docker on EC2 instance. So we have seen that we have created a Docker image, and now we just gonna run our Docker image on 8,000. Now we see the image is running. It's similar to what when we were directly running to our in our local host from Python, basically main.py. Now to test it out, what we can do, we can create a simple client and test that if we can access this Docker basically endpoint. So for that client, again, let me just create another terminal and go into the client. Let's it's gonna be again the same step. We're gonna set up the environment. We're gonna set up basically requirement file, and so let me just do that. Now for requirement, I'm gonna be using, let's say, let's see what client we are using. Okay, let's go inside the client and create it. Now before I go to the requirement file, I'm just gonna talk a little bit about the client which I'm planning to use here. Let me bring this over. So for this, I'm setting up client using strengths. I already have a video out, but in this video, I'm gonna cover basically what strength is and what it does. So I'm just gonna copy this code, which is basically when we are using HTTP as a transport layer. So let's just copy directly without any change. Now you do see here it is calling localhost, and why is it complaining about that? And we just try again. Oh, my bad, sorry, I'm trying to copy in a requirement file. Okay, makes sense. All right, so I'm just gonna create another main py for it and then copy this. So basically strengths is, I mean, you define the client, what kind of a transport you are using. It has multiple, it support all of it, like Studio and SSE and HTTP in this case. Basically, and you have a local host, and here we are saying that this we are looking for MCP server on this port and in this location, and this is a list tool, and inside list tool you are making a simple call for your agent. Now what we can do is see the requirements basically. So if we go to the quick start, we can see the requirement file. So it asks us to have strengths agents and strength agent tools in our requirement. So let's go and add those. Now once we have that, let's just install and And we already know that our server is running on localhost 8000. So once it is installed, we should be able to run our client and get detail about it. So let's just run our main file. So you do see that it is able to identify the tool which it has to call is server info. When I just say server details, and it just give me about detail about the machine. But you see it is still pointing to the local host. So that is what we need to change now. We need to deploy this into EC2 instance on AWS environment and try to reach on that endpoint instead of pointing into our local environment. Now, once your setup is completed, we're gonna go into our AWS account and set up our EC2 instance where we can host our MCP server. So let's head to our AWS account. So this is AWS console homepage. We are using EC2 instance as a compute. Either you can search here if it is not available for you on a home screen. And once you are EC2 instance, click on instances. It's gonna show all your running instances. Right now I don't have any running instance, so that's why it's empty. On the right corner you should have a launch instance panel button. So once you click on launch instance, it's gonna ask you a few questions. The first thing would be the name. Now this can be anything, so let's say MCP server 1 we give it, and machine, which machine you want, one OS you want. I'm gonna use Linux, so my script's gonna, the scripts which I have, I'm gonna use in this demo, gonna work with Linux. It's gonna work with Ubuntu as well. If we use any other OS, its script might be a little different, but it should not be a big deal. The scripts which we are running is very small. Now it's the other thing it asks you to choose is instance type. In our MCP server is very small, and this let's select go with free tier, which is T3 micro. Now this is important. It asks we gonna SSH into our machine basically, and we need a key for that. If you don't have key available, I would say just create here. It's pretty simple. You just create key, it's gonna download for you. Just give the name. I already have a key on my machine, so I'm just gonna use that. And let's not change anything here, and then launch instance. Now it's gonna take just a couple of, not even a minute actually. It's already created an instance for me. Now I have some servers running, so we're not gonna use those. Now this is MCP server is working for me. It's loading. Let's wait for it. Okay, so it's running now. Once you see this running state, click on this connect. It's gonna take you to this session manager or connect screen basically. Few important things. Now this is the IP address. I want you to note it down. We're gonna use it. This will be used to connect if you want to connect with your local machine to this EC2 instance. So we will need that. Okay, so once we have saved this, click on this connect. Now once you this connect, it will connect to your EC2 instance on a console. First thing, I want you to run few scripts here. Now let me copy and paste the scripts. So what are these scripts doing? So first thing we are doing, we are updating our instance, and then we are installing Docker and giving user access to the Docker. So run these commands. Now these commands will take some time to update your instance. Let's wait for it. Now once the installation is completed, let's go and check if Docker is installed. So we can see the Docker is installed now. Let's get back to our AWS console. Now before we close this, one important note, we are planning to access our MCP server with HTTP port 8000. But if you see our security groups, we only have access to port 2020, which is for SSH. So let's update our security group and allow access to port 8000. Click on added inbound rules. Here you're gonna select custom TCP, give the port. So this is the same port which we gonna be using with an MCP, but you can choose any other port as well. 00 means it's publicly accessible. If you want to restrict, just give your CIDR block here and click on save rules. Now we have access to our 8000 port, and let's get back to our EC2 instance. And now again, before we close, I want you to copy the public IP address which we're going to be using, and let's get back to our terminal. So here in a terminal, we're gonna try to connect with our EC2 instance first, and I'm gonna show you the same thing which we do from the console, how we can do it from here. Show you how you can do it from your local. So we're just gonna SSH. Now here it is your basically path for our private key which we downloaded, basically which we created. This is the user which you're gonna be using, and this is the public IP address which we selected. Basically, so if you see, there's a public IP address. So once you connect, it's gonna ask you yes, and now you can see you are connected here. Now important thing, you see there is no files right now. So what are we gonna do next is we're gonna move all our files for MCP server which we created to this EC2 instance. Now you see, in this case we have this Docker file, main and requirement. These are the three files. So we just gonna move these three files into our MCP server. Oh, sorry, EC2 instance. So let's get back here. Now here I'm in the same folder where my files are, and so basically here I'm again giving the path of my key and the files which I want to move. So in this case, I'm moving main file and the Docker file and the requirement file. Now this is not the only solution, and we don't have to manually upload the files. Ideally, we gonna build the image which we built in locally, and we move the image into EC2 instance. Now to move the image into EC2 instance, we need to push either into some repository, let's say ECR or public Docker repository, but I mean, that's a different, I don't want to confuse with those things. So just keeping it simple, but just to let you know, this is a manual process. You don't have to do it. Now let's go to our EC2 instance again on the next tab, and we ran the ls and we saw there was no files. So now we can see we have files now. Now what we're gonna do, we're just gonna run our docker run command, and we're gonna see build our Docker image and run the container. So for that, let me just let's run Docker. Actually, Docker, let's build the image first. Let's call this FastMCP. Sorry, my bad. And just build. Now we have a Docker image, so just run our Docker and give it a port which we whitelisted, which is 8000. And we just give the same name what we give to a Docker image. So now we can see in our basically EC2 instance, we have it running into the port. Now let's see if we are able to access it with our client. Now to access our client, we instead of localhost, we need to point to our EC2 instance. To point to EC2 instance, go to your EC2 instance and copy the public IP address which we saw it earlier, and let's get back to our solution and paste it here and just save it, and then we just gonna run our, and let's see if it is able to get the tool. So it made a call, it is calling get server info based my query, and it is able to get the detail. Is it identified? Is this? So yeah, it is successfully able to call the server and get the details. So now we saw that we are able to host our MCP server on EC2 instance. Now, one thing to note, right now I'm pointing to a public IP address in or in production environment. You should have a load balancer in front of it. You will never expose your IP address basically to the outside world. And but you have multiple options to deploy. Once you have a Docker image, you can deploy it anywhere. So yeah, and this is it. So what we saw that how to build our MCP server with Python and using FastMCP, and we saw how we can build a Docker image for it and publish into EC2 instance, and connecting with our Strands client using IP address for EC2 instance. And let me know if you have any questions, comment down below, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you so much.